Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be diving into some on-chain data. Specifically, we're going to be looking at long-term trends in wallet sizes holding various amounts of Bitcoin. So the number of wallets holding various amounts of Bitcoin as a function of time to try to understand if there are any trends that are worthwhile to consider. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I do think it would be beneficial for viewers of this channel to also be exposed to on-chain data. Okay, it is an important part of the cryptocurrency asset class, and up until now, I haven't done the best job of communicating on-chain data that well. We've talked about it some, but certainly we've left a lot to be desired. So we're going to try to provide some periodic updates to various on-chain metrics. All right. So, and by the way, all of this you can access through the premium list into thecryptoverse.com. So what we're looking at here is the amount of unique Bitcoin addresses that hold at least 0.001 Bitcoin. Now, before we get into this, there are some caveats I should say to on-chain data. Theoretically speaking, a lot of this stuff could be easily manipulated. Okay, so do consider that. And you guys know I don't say that lightly in terms of, price manipulation, because anytime the price goes down, so many people yell out price manipulation if it's not hitting their price targets, which I think is ridiculous. But there is some truth to the idea that on-chain analysis, on-chain metrics could be subject to some type of manipulation. If you think about it, if someone bought 1 Bitcoin, they could theoretically send 1/1000th of a Bitcoin to 1,000 different wallets, and then it'll look like you have 1,000 different people that just picked up 0.001 Bitcoin, when in fact it was one person sending it to 1,000 different wallets. Now, I hope there's no one out there sending Bitcoin to 1,000 different wallets. I hope they have a better use of their time than that. But you get the idea, right? There are going to be instances where what you see in the on-chain data might not be the most reliable. But that doesn't mean we can't learn some things, all right? So the first thing we're going to look at here, wallets, addresses that hold at least 0.001 Bitcoin. So this is not wallets that just hold 0.001 Bitcoin. It's wallets that hold that hold at least 0.001 Bitcoin. They could also hold 100 Bitcoin, and they would still be included in this chart. All right. What do you notice when you look at this chart? Well, it's mostly up, right? I've a lot of on-chain analysts, they always, everything always looks so bullish, right? And when you look at these charts, it's hard to fault them for it, right? You just look at the chart and it looks like, wow, there's more addresses that are holding at least a little bit of Bitcoin. So why shouldn't the price trend up with time? And to be frank, that's what the price does, right? The price of Bitcoin does trend up with time through various boom and bust cycles. But what I think is the most interesting on this chart specifically is the fact that in 2017, there was actually a fairly big drop off right here, right after the peak. Okay, and fairly soon after the peak, you can see that the number of addresses holding at least 1/1000th of a Bitcoin sharply declined from approximately around 15, 16 million or so, or sorry, not 15, maybe around 14 million or so, all the way back down to 11 to 12 million. Okay, and then it took until the end of the bear market for it to start trending higher again. Okay, so it took a full year during that time. What do you notice though about this market cycle? Well, during this first local top that we had earlier in 2021, we had a slight drop off, right? A slight drop off. And then we sort of leveled off a little. But then we started going back up. So right now, I think if we were to zoom in, you would actually see it's going down very, very slightly. But in the grand scheme, this cycle saw a huge sell-off in terms of, or at least a huge delta, a huge change between wallets holding at least 0.001 Bitcoin. So basically, a lot of people who had Bitcoin, even a very small amount of it, were probably just sending it, doing and getting rid of it, and then not thinking about it for a long time. I do think that as the years go on, more and more people are wising up to the idea that Bitcoin isn't just going to go to zero if it goes through a correction phase. So more and more people are having the conviction that they should actually hold on to their Bitcoin rather than sell it during a correction. That, and I understand. I mean, people I think most people understand that prices can always go lower, right? They can always go lower, but as long as you have the investment mentality of, hey, we're here for the long haul, what happens tomorrow is completely irrelevant. The fundamentals of Bitcoin are the same today as they were at 69K, therefore, just going to keep stacking sats, right? So this is what it looks like for 0.001 Bitcoin. But what if we change this? Can we learn something if we change the amount or the addresses that are holding a certain amount? So what if we get rid of some of the noise of smaller wallets that are holding, say, only 0.001 Bitcoin and say, you know what? What are the trends in wallets that are holding at least 100th of a Bitcoin? Okay? And 100th of a Bitcoin is it's a reasonable amount. Okay, so the price of Bitcoin is currently trading for around $42,000. So, I mean, a tenth of a Bitcoin would be 4,200. So for people to have a 1/100th of a Bitcoin, they're having at least $400 worth of Bitcoin. Okay, so that could be, that certainly reduces the footprint by having, people who have only, say, $40 worth of Bitcoin, but to at least have a few $100s. And if you look at that chart, this is what you get. Well, what does this show? Well, it shows an actually similar trend to what we saw on the last one, namely that after the 2017 sell-off, there was a huge drop back down, and we didn't really get back into an uptrend, slight uptrend during the bear market, but we didn't really get into a more solid uptrend that we've been on ever since until we put in the market cycle bottom. What do you also notice? Market participants so far seem relatively unfazed by what's happened in 2021. And the number of wallets that have at least 1/100th of a Bitcoin, it's still growing. I mean, it's just simply still growing. And so maybe this shines some light on why on-chain analysts can continue to remain macro bullish. Okay, I'm macro bullish, by the way. I'm definitely macro bullish, but I wanted to talk about this some. And so hopefully by going through some of this on-chain stuff, which we're going to do somewhat regularly now, we can improve the channel and also improve the content that you get to see on this channel. Let's continue on. What about one Bitcoin? Is there anything that we can learn by looking at one Bitcoin? So wallets holding at least one Bitcoin. It looks a little bit different. Okay, this one looks a little bit different. One Bitcoin is not a negligible amount of money. I mean, you're talking about someone who's legitimately sitting on at least, $42,000 or so of Bitcoin. Okay? Well, what can we say? Well, in 2013, we continue going higher. One thing you should note when you think about this is that in 2013, it was a lot easier to purchase a Bitcoin, okay, in terms of an entire Bitcoin, because all you needed, even at the peak, was like $1,000, right? And then after the sell-off, down here, you only needed a couple $100s to own one full Bitcoin. So it wasn't nearly as difficult to own a Bitcoin, right? To own at least one Bitcoin. So we have to keep in the back of our minds that as the price of Bitcoin grows, it is going to become harder and harder for people to own at least one Bitcoin, which does still seem like a realistic target for a lot of people. Now, obviously not everyone, but if you've been in the crypto space for a while and you've been investing for a few years and you're watching altcoins, potentially go up 10x at various phases, there's a reasonable chance that a lot of investors are either working towards getting to one Bitcoin or they have one Bitcoin. Or it might still be a long ways off. But you can still get there, theoretically speaking, assuming you have some good altcoin picks. They go up, you take profits back to Bitcoin. All right. So what can we learn from this chart? Well, after 2017, we saw a bit of a sell-off, and then we actually slightly trended up during the bear market to the same level that we were at during 2017, and then we saw another sell-off. From the bear market bottom, we increased, and here you can see that there were people taking profits. Okay, and back during the January, February, March, and April timeframe for Bitcoin, I was actually also taking profits, as I said many times, at least in the premium list, of course. But I also was pretty adamant on the public YouTube channel that Bitcoin was ahead of schedule. We needed a pullback. We needed at the very least a 3 to 6 month summer lull before we could put in new all-time highs, which more or less came to pass. Now, right now, obviously, we've experienced yet another dip, but we're still working through that to see where it takes us. So what you'll notice, though, is that Bitcoin, during the first local top phase, the number of addresses holding at least one Bitcoin pulled back significantly. But during this one, it hasn't pulled back. Not really. We saw a slight pullback here, just very, very slight, but then we're back in an uptrend. This uptrend over here the uptrend basically started when we were in the last few couple of weeks or so of the summer lull, right? You can see that's where the uptrend started. Not at the very bottom, but a few weeks beforehand. And if you look at the top wallet addresses, there are several hundred of them that were actually accumulating then, right? They were accumulating in the summer, okay? And so what you notice is that the first peak over here, tons of profits were taken. But the second peak, not really a whole lot, right? Weren't really that many profits taken up here, not compared to the first one. And the reason I'm saying that is just because you can see there hasn't really been, a huge change here in the number of wallets that are holding at least one Bitcoin. So there are still a lot of people that have the conviction to hold. Now, theoretically speaking, you can imagine a situation where if 1,000 people hold one Bitcoin and they all decide to go sell their one Bitcoin to to 1,000 different people, then that one coin could change hands, from 1,000 people over here to 1,000 people over there, and this is going to stay the same. But I do think, and by the way, I'm sort of learning this as I go along as well. I do think that one way to look at this chart is to say, well, look, I mean, there's a pretty clear sell-off here during this first local top over here. There's a pretty clear sell-off in 2017. There hasn't really been a clear sell-off here at the second local top. Okay, it really hasn't. Okay, and it's actually still trending higher. So, I mean, what it shows to me is that people are still accumulating. All right. And I mean, it could be a number of things, right? It could be some of the smaller wallets are capitulating and stronger hands are adding to their stacks. It could be that I mean, we know there are some whales selling, there are some whales buying. So, if one whale sells like 1,000 Bitcoin and they sell it to 1,000 different people, then you can go from having one wallet owning 1,000 Bitcoin to having 1,000 wallets owning one Bitcoin, and then this would go up, right? Because the number of addresses holding that certain amount of cryptocurrency would go up. Now let's continue on. Let's look at 10 Bitcoin. Does that tell us anything? As we get into higher amounts, it's going to become harder and harder because, at this point, to have 10 Bitcoin, you're talking about having over $400,000 worth, okay? So still, there are definitely a lot of people in the asset class that have that much money in crypto, as you can see, right? I mean, there's legitimately 148,000 addresses, or somewhere around that area. Currently, maybe around a little bit less than that. 147,000, 148,000 wallets, addresses that hold at least 10 Bitcoin. Think about that for a second. Think about that. So 10 Bitcoin is about $420,000 almost. And there are 148,000 wallets that hold at least 10 Bitcoin. Okay, which is kind of crazy. I mean, that's like at least 10 Bitcoin for 147,000 wallets. Then you're talking about 1.4 to 1.5 million Bitcoin out of a total of 21 million are held in these wallets, which is kind of crazy to think about. But are there any trends from this one that we can look at? Well, maybe slightly. But again, as the price of Bitcoin goes up, it's going to be harder and harder for people to have, to get 10 Bitcoin. So we're not really comparing the same types of things. But after the 2017 peak, you can see there was a nice sell-off, and then it continued to more or less stay flat for a while. It sort of increased here at the market cycle bottom, and then during the March or January, February, March, and April, a huge drop, right? A huge drop. And the drop occurred before we got up there, right? I mean, like the drop occurred around this level, around the prior all-time high, which kind of makes sense, right? There's probably a lot of people that said, all right, Bitcoin's at 20K, going to be a lot of resistance here, and maybe we go back down. I even thought at the time that it would take a bit longer to break through 20K, but we didn't, right? We continued to move higher. And a lot of whales, you can see, a lot of wallets that held at least 10 Bitcoin sold off around the prior all-time high, right around here. And they continued selling off throughout the entire distribution phase, Wyckoff distribution phase up here, okay? In anticipation of what? What we said, the summer lull, right? The 3 to 6 month phase where we have to go down for a little bit. Since then, it's mostly been going sideways. It recently went up a little when we first had this drop, and now it's come back down a little. But what you're not seeing the same type of sell-off that we saw back over here. So what that shows me is that there are at least a decent number of wallets holding at least 10 Bitcoin that are not feeling, a strong desire to just sell off their stack and call it a day. All right. So mostly flat after a huge sell-off earlier this year. All right. Let's continue on a little bit. Let's look quickly at 100 Bitcoin, which I mean, at this point, you're getting into having to, needing at least $4 million to have at least 100 Bitcoin. And I mean, you can see that we basically, in 2017, it was already going down. And then since then, it's just been continuing to more or less go down. And again, part of the reason is because as the price of Bitcoin goes up, you're going to have fewer and fewer people that are willing to just throw $4 million to accumulate 100 Bitcoin. But I mean, you can see that it did continue to decrease through the distribution phase very, very slightly. But actually, during the September dip, it actually went up some. Okay, and now since then, it's actually come right back down to just below where it was. But you can see that with 100 Bitcoin, it's mostly just been flat for quite a long period of time. Continuing on, we have 1,000 Bitcoin, which does seem a little bit ridiculous because a lot of people aren't going to have, 1,000 Bitcoin is a lot of Bitcoin to own. Are there any useful trends though? 2017, we sold off going into 2017. So while it addresses holding 1,000 Bitcoin, we're selling off already when Bitcoin was at $3,000. And they continued to sell off throughout the peak. And then once we got to the peak, it went flat. Okay, so basically what it shows is that there were a lot of people that probably acquired a position somewhere over here. They started taking profits at around $3,000. They continued taking profits all the way up. And then, of course, the number of addresses holding at least 1,000 Bitcoin went down. We went flat for the bear market, and then we started trending up. And what do you notice? Look at that. It spiked. Seems really interesting, doesn't it? Right? It seems really interesting. It spiked during this phase, going into the distribution phase, right? One of the reasons I think that's interesting is because you didn't really see a major spike like that over here. You do see that over here. Clearly what it says is that some bigger fish are coming to the party, right? We've connected our lake that was once, obviously that was not connected to the ocean where all the big fish are. We've connected that lake to the ocean, and now the ocean, which is full of much bigger fish than had really ever looked into the crypto asset class before, they've decided to get introduced to it. And they picked up 1,000 Bitcoin, right? Now, could it be one wallet that's decided to, if they had 100,000 Bitcoin, maybe they split it up into 100 different wallets? I mean, could that be affecting it? Yeah, it could, right? It could. I mean, it's not like there's that many addresses here. I mean, we're currently at around 2,000 addresses holding at least 1,000 Bitcoin. Um, but what you can see is that it spiked during this phase, and then during the distribution phase, it came right back down. What's going on today, though? It's just flat, right? It's just flat again. Nothing's going on. And I mean, I wish I could say, well, what does being flat mean in terms of this curve? Well, I mean, we were flat over here for a while, and then it led into an uptrend, but we were also flat during the bear market, which then didn't start an uptrend, or the uptrend started right at the end of the bear market, and then it just continued on after we had the final capitulation. So I don't really know that there's a whole lot we can learn from this. It's just that there aren't a lot of wallets that hold at least 1,000 Bitcoin that are completely liquidating their positions, or at least getting to the point where they no longer hold 1,000. Huge spike here. It's come back down since, and it's just been going sideways. 10,000 Bitcoin. That's just going to be in a downtrend, right? I mean, it's going to be next to impossible for most places to have 10,000 Bitcoin. You can see there's only about 85 addresses, 90 addresses or so that have 10,000 Bitcoin. And it's basically, it entered a pretty brutal downtrend starting in November of 2020, right? When we getting close to when we passed the all-time high, in a pretty brutal downtrend. It was even going down as far into, it actually went down all the way until we got up to close to this second local top. Okay, so if I hover over that, you can kind of see where that crosses there. So it's actually been in a local uptrend during the drop here. So there are some people, there are some wallets accumulating 10,000 Bitcoin. 100,000. Well, we went from 3,000. We went from 3 addresses holding at least 100,000 Bitcoin. Now we have 4 addresses holding at least 100,000 Bitcoin. So if you are one of those addresses, then I admire your conviction. I certainly do. And then finally, 1 million Bitcoin. At least 1 million Bitcoin, right? 0. So at least 1 million Bitcoin. Hopefully this has been useful to you guys. I mean, this is just me sort of exploring on-chain data. It's certainly possible that I've misinterpreted it. If I have, tell me, right? Tell me, because I'm just exploring it for the first time, like you guys are. And I mean, I think this is some interesting stuff, and I'll continue to follow it. If you want access to these charts, again, you can go to intothecryptoverse.com and sign up. And note, we also actually have the same type of analysis here for Ethereum, Cardano, Polkadot, Chainlink, Algorand, Maker, Ripple, Tezos, Aave, Litecoin, Decentraland, Stellar, Uniswap, and Crypto.com coin. So just wanted to provide insight into some on-chain analytics for Bitcoin and say, you know what? It's 2022. How are we going to make the channel better? One way we can make it better is to not only focus on long-term trends in the market and trying to mine data, like data science. We can also look at some on-chain data, which can give us useful insights that perhaps we wouldn't have had before. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the Telegram channel, which you can find a link to in the description below. We also do have the premium list at intothecryptoverse.com, where you can find this chart as long as a lot of other charts. Okay, and we are continuing to develop that and grow that. So thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe, click the bell icon to turn on notifications. I'll see you next time. Bye.